Well, hello everybody. Dave here again. It's a beautiful Saturday afternoon, the actual Sabbath, and I'm going to be working on it. So, here we go. Welcome back to another episode of Secrets of the Bible, dirty little secrets that Christians don't like to talk about. So, on today's episode, I want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, Noah and the flood. So, flood myths have been around since the dawn of time. The flood narrative in the Bible is not the only flood myth. The Chinese have a flood myth, the Mayans, the Egyptians. All ancient societies have this flood myth. But what I want to talk about is Genesis 6. And we're going to use logic, people. Remember, we're always about logic. And it says here in Genesis 6, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them that they chose. Now, as a young man, I always found this verse to be quite perplexing. The sons of God are, of course, the angels. We know it's not Jesus, but it's the angels. And one thing that I find very interesting is we're told, if you're raised Christian, that heaven is this amazing, beautiful, wonderful, place filled with such wonder and ecstasy that you're just happy all the time. But is it really? Because how can angels born in paradise lust after human women? You mean to tell me that the beauty of a human woman is greater than the beauty of heaven? And these aren't fallen angels. These are angels in heaven. And then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. So the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans, and they had children of them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So first God created the angels, then He created us. We're mortal, trapped on the earth. Angels come down, His Nephilim come down and intermarry with us, and He blames us. How is it our fault? This is wicked in God's eyes, but we had nothing to do with it. These are God's creations that are screwing up, and He's blaming us. The God of the Bible does not take any responsibility for His mistakes. Oh, but I forgot, He can't make mistakes. And then we get to the point where it makes absolutely no sense when you're looking at it logically. We are told throughout the Bible that God is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, that He knows all things. And then it says right here in Genesis 6, verse 6, the Lord regretted that He had made human beings on the earth, and His heart was deeply troubled. How can a being that knows the future have regret? Let's say, for example, I know the future. So let's say, for example, I know that if I go to work tonight, I'm going to get in an accident. But still, I go to work, and then I get in that accident, and I'm mad about it. I know the future. I knew that I was going to get into an accident. Shouldn't have I stayed home? I should have stayed home. So how can God have regret if He knows the future? And how can His heart be deeply troubled? How does God even have a heart? I thought He was a being of light. So, then it goes into Noah and the flood, and God comes to him and says, make an ark, blah, blah, blah. So I want to skip on to Genesis 7. And there's something in Genesis 7 that I find extremely interesting, and I also find to be proof that this story is BS. It was not written by God, and it was written by men who didn't know what the hell they were talking about. So God goes through all of his things, explanations to Noah, and it says, every living thing that moves on the land will perish because of the flood. Birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that has the breath of life in its nostrils will die. So we know what this is talking about. It's saying all the creatures, mankind included, that breathe oxygen will die. And then Noah was instructed to gather 2 of some and 7 of others. But he didn't have to gather the fish, because the writers back then, fish live in water. A flood's going to happen. Flood's not going to hurt fish. You know, if you go to Ken Ham's Noah's Ark in Kentucky, they don't have no fish on his ark, because fish live in the water and they don't have the breath of life in their nostrils. But there's other things that live in water that breathe air, oxygen. Whales, dolphins, seals, narwhals, manatees, mud skippers. There's all sorts of animals that spend their lifetime in water. Killer whales, and this is where you know a God didn't write this, that some idiotic man or men or whatever wrote it. Because back then, they believed everything that lived in water had to be a fish. They didn't understand about mammals. They didn't understand that whales, dolphins, narwhals give birth to live young, breathe oxygen from blowholes. I don't remember seeing any whales or dolphins on Noah's Ark. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that people believe that this actually occurred. How can modern people believe this BS story? How can people that live in a time where we walked on the moon and we have technology where light moving through wire transmits information, fiber optics, that you have a cell phone that connects to satellites in the sky and you can look up any information that you want to. We have planes that fly through the sky like myths of Greek gods. And yet people believe in the Bible. So I'm going to also point out other civilizations that were living around the time of Noah's flood, that they didn't even notice the flood that supposedly covered the entire planet. So it is believed that Noah's flood happened somewhere in the 24th century. So let's look at things that were going on, events in the 24th century. The Mesopotamian wars of the early dynastic period continued, weren't affected by the flood. We have large painted jars of birds from the Indus River Valley civilization that are today in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They weren't destroyed by any floodwaters. You can go look at them today. There's archaeological evidence of the site of Assur was occupied around that time. We have the end of the early dynastic III period of Mesopotamia. We have the first destruction of the city of Mari. We have the end of the 5th dynasty. Pharaoh Unas died. We have the 6th dynasty of Egypt starts. We have the Akkadian Empire. We have the Semitic chieftain Sargon of Akkad's conquest of Sumer and Mesopotamia. And we have Dangun established Goshen of the Korean kingdom. And also there was inventions going on. There's the first official mentioning of beekeeping in Egypt. We have the first documented use of an organized courier service for the diffusion of written documents in Egypt. And we have the first evidence of the written Akkadian language. All of these things were going on when this supposed flood happened. And they didn't notice. Egypt was moving from one dynasty to the next. They didn't even write nothing down that any of this was happening. Clay jars that are today in the Museum of Fine Art in Boston still survived. A huge flood covered the earth, and clay jars survived. The whole earth didn't survive, but clay jars survived? Okay. All of these things were going on throughout the world, and nobody noticed this flood. Do you understand? From another video, there are no answers in Genesis. It is ridiculous, albeit interesting myth. It is as interesting as the myths of the Nordic people, Thor. It is as interesting as the Greek mythology. It's as interesting as the Egyptian mythology, but it's just mythology. And people base their entire lives, their identity, on this book, this fictional book. I think about here in America, I always hear Christians saying, this is a Judeo-Christian. And if you want to believe what you want to believe, that's fine. Believe whatever you want to believe. But what makes me angry is I have to live in a country where there's people that rule over me and laws that are made based on this nonsense that affect my life. It would be like, say in 10,000 years, there's a really good, I used to love Stephen King when I was a kid. And I used to read all his books. So say 100,000 years from now, if the earth's still around, somebody digs up The Stand. His book about the end of the world, Captain Trips, the flu, Randall Flagg and all that fun stuff. And that becomes the new Bible. And people's like, see, everything was killed because of a big flu. And there was this 2 groups, one in Boulder, Colorado. And see, Boulder, Colorado ends up becoming the new Jerusalem. And Las Vegas was Randall Flagg, and that becomes the new hell. And people believe that. We would be laughing at them. That's a fictional book written by Stephen King. He also wrote books about dogs with freaking rabies and killer clowns from outer space. But you're taking it as religion and basing your whole society on the writings of a guy who admits that he did a lot of cocaine. So I think the writers of the Bible, they may not have had cocaine, but they were smoking something. So this is David, Zoe Zizzles. Make sure to like and subscribe. And I'll see you in a couple of days or hours or whatever hits my fancy. Bye.